As companies grow, they're looking at expanding globally, such as exporting their products, building facilities, and entering alliances, and this all requires managers to understand human resource management principles and practices that are prevalent in a global market, not just their local market. Once organizations have taken advantage of these opportunities, they sometimes find themselves locked into overseas arrangements. As an example, in the consumer electronics industry, for example, so much of the manufacturing has shifted to China and other low-wage countries that U.S. companies no longer will have the suppliers nearby if they tried to build a factory here in North America. Foreign countries can provide a business with new markets in which there are millions or billions of new customers. Also, developing countries often provide such markets, but developed countries do so as well. Companies set up operations in overseas because they can operate with lower labor costs. Human resource management needs to understand laws and customs for the international workforce. So there are a couple trade agreements that help facilitate global activities. That's the North American Free Trade Agreement. You'll usually hear this referred to as NAFTA, and the World Trade Organization, or WTO. North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, is established a free trade zone in North America. It was signed back in 1992 by Canada, Mexico, and the United States, then took effect in January of 1994. NAFTA immediately lifted tariffs on the majority of goods produced by those signatory nations. In September 2018, the United States, Mexico, and Canada reached an agreement to replace NAFTA with the United States Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, and all three countries had ratified it by March of 2020. NAFTA has remained in force until the United States Mexico-Canada Agreement was implemented, which took effect on July 1st, 2020. Once again, that's what replaced NAFTA. Pretty recent here in the business world. Now, the World Trade Organization is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. At its heart are the WTO agreements, negotiated and signed by the bulk of the world's trading nations and ratified in their parliaments. The goal is to help producers of goods and services, exporters, and importers conduct their international business. Essentially, the World Trade Organization is a place where member governments try to sort out the trade problems that they face with one another. Let's now discuss employees in an international workforce. When organizations operate globally, their employees are very likely to be citizens of more than one country. Employees may come from the employer's parent country, a host country, or even a third country. When I say parent country, this is the country in which an organization's headquarters is located. A host country there is a country other than the parent company in which an organization operates a facility. I said it could also be a third country. This is a country that is neither the parent country nor the host country of an employer. You might have heard the term before, and if not, I want to bring up the term expatriates here. Expatriates are employees who live outside their native country that have been assigned to work in another country. I'll talk more about expatriates soon. As organizations grow, they often begin to meet demand from customers in other countries. The usual way that companies begin to enter foreign markets is by exporting or shipping domestically produced items to other countries to be sold in those countries. Eventually, it may become economically desirable to set up operations in one or more foreign countries. I want to talk about three different types of organizations here. That's the international organization, the multinational company, and the global organization. The international organization is an organization that sets up one or a few facilities in one or a few foreign countries. A multinational company is an organization that builds facilities in a number of different countries in an effort to minimize its production and its distribution costs. Now, a global organization is an organization that chooses to locate a facility based on the ability to effectively, efficiently, and flexibly produce a product or service using cultural differences as an advantage. We need to talk about transnational human resource management systems. This is a type of HRM system that makes decisions from a global perspective and includes managers from many countries and is based on ideas contributed by people representing a variety of cultures. I just introduced the term global organization. A global organization needs a transnational human resource management system that features decision making from that global perspective. We want to get and utilize the knowledge of these managers from many countries and the ideas that are contributed by people from many different cultures. Decisions that are the outcome of a transnational human resource management system balance uniformity with flexibility. So we're looking at the fairness, and we account for cultural and legal differences when it comes to the decision-making process. Now, the most important influence on international human resource management is the culture of the country in which a facility is physically located. Let's think of culture as a community set of shared assumptions about how the world works and what ideas are worth striving for. Cultural characteristics influence the way members of an organization behave towards one another, as well as their attitudes towards various human resource management practices. Culture strongly influences the appropriateness of our human resource management practices. Cultural differences can affect how people communicate and how they coordinate their activities. Culture greatly affects a country's laws, and cultural influences may be expressed through customs or languages or religions and so on when it comes to a culture. Culture also influences what people value, so it affects people's economic systems and their efforts to invest. Culture may determine effectiveness of our human resource management practices. Such cultural characteristics as these influence the way members of an organization behave towards one another, as well as their attitudes towards various human resource management practices. Practices that are effective here in the United States, for example, may fail or even backfire in a country with different beliefs and values. Differences among organizations within a particular culture are sometimes larger than differences from country to country. It's important for an organization to match its human resource practices to its values, and those individuals who share those values are likely to be interested in working for the organization. Cultures differ strongly in their opinions about how managers should lead, how decisions should be handled, and what motivates the employees. To further understand culture, please consider the 5 dimensions of culture that Geert Hofstede identified in a classic study of culture. And those 5 dimensions are individualism and collectivism. The second dimension is the power distance. The third is uncertainty avoidance. The fourth is masculinity or femininity. And the 5th dimension of culture is long-term, short-term orientation. As an example, in Taiwan, a country that's high in collectivism, co-workers consider themselves more as group members instead of just individuals. The success of human resource management decisions related to job design, benefits, performance management, and other systems related to employee motivation also will be shaped by that culture. Cultural differences can affect how people communicate and how they coordinate their activities. So organizations must prepare managers to recognize and handle cultural differences. They should recruit managers with knowledge of the other cultures. They should also provide training to give our existing managers that cultural knowledge they need to be successful. And organizations must select expatriates carefully. Expatriates must be able to adapt to the new environments that they're going to be placed in. A few other factors affecting human resource management in international markets include education and their skill levels, economic systems, and the political and legal systems. Now, countries also differ in the degree to which their labor markets include people with the education and skills of value to employers. Educational opportunities also vary from one country to another. In general, spending on education is greater per pupil in high-income countries than in the poorer countries. The health of an economic system affects the human resource management. In developed countries with great wealth, labor costs are relatively high. Such differences showing up in compensation systems and in recruiting and in our selection decisions. A country's economic system, whether capitalist or socialist, as well as the government involvement in the economy through taxes or compensation, price controls, and other activities, are going to influence the human resource management practices in several ways. Now, a country's political system, its government, its laws and regulations are strongly going to affect human resource management. The country's laws often dictate the requirements for certain human resource management practices, such as training or compensation or the hiring or firing of employees. The United States has led the world in eliminating discrimination in the workplace. Since the amount of take-home pay a worker receives after taxes may thus differ from country to country, in an organization that pays two managers in two countries $100,000 each, the manager in one country might take home more than the manager in another country. Such differences make pay structures more complicated when they cross national boundaries, and they can affect the recruiting of our candidates from more than one country. Now, the political legal system arises to a large degree from culture in which it exists, so the laws and the regulations reflect the cultural values. For example, when I talked about the United States is leading the world in eliminating discrimination in the workplace, because this value is important in the U.S. culture, the nation has very safe and legal safeguards, such as ones we've talked about before with equal employment opportunity, which, as I've said in the past, affects the hiring and other HRM decisions. As a society, the U.S. also has strong beliefs regarding the fairness of pay systems, thus the Fair Labor Standards Act that we've discussed before, among some other laws and regulations, such as where we set a minimum wage for a variety of jobs. Other laws and regulations dictate much of the process of negotiation between unions and management. All of these are just examples of laws and regulations that affect the practices of human resource management here in the U.S. Similarly, laws and regulations in other countries reflect the norms of those cultures. There are differences among countries in how they affect our human resource planning process in our international operations. As economic and technological changes creates a global environment for organizations, human resource planning is involved in decisions about participating as an exporter or as an international, multinational, or global company. Even purely domestic companies may draw talent from our international labor markets. When organizations decide to operate internationally or globally, HR planning involves decisions about where and how many employees are needed for each of our international facilities. Some of the relevant issues we have to look at when it comes to this HR planning in our international facilities is like the local market pay rates and the labor laws in those areas, or where to locate our international facilities. There could be a factor of cost and availability of our qualified workers. There are also financial and operational requirements. And one of the issues we may come across is that outsourcing may have to be involved in our planning. Now, the emotions that accompany an overseas assignment for an individual tend to follow in a cycle like the image I'm sharing here. These emotional stages associated with foreign assignments are the honeymoon stage, the culture shock stage, the learning stage or recovery, and the adjustment stage. The honeymoon stage is a period of fascination and euphoria as this employee enjoys the novelty of the new culture they've been introduced to. The next stage, the culture shock, this is the disillusionment and unfreezing of ideas that occurred during the process of adjusting to that culture. They're no longer, overwhelmed and enjoying it. Now they need to adjust to that new culture. Now the recovery stage, this is a continued learning about the host country's culture, its language, and increasing their comfort level and their mood. Now the adjustment stage is where the expatriate accepts and enjoys the host country's culture. Qualities such as flexibility, motivation, agreeableness, and conscientiousness are very important because of the challenges that are involved in entering another culture. So you must keep that in mind when you're selecting these employees. Successful completion of overseas assignments has been found to be most likely among employees who are extroverts. They're outgoing, they're agreeable, they're cooperative, as well as conscientious, because they're going to be dependable and they're going to be achievement oriented. In an organization whose employees come from more than one country, two special challenges arise with respect to training and development. Developers of effective training programs for an international workforce must ask certain questions, such as the objectives for the training and its content, the training techniques that are going to be used, strategies, and which type of media they're going to use. Language differences will require translations, any other interventions, and conditions that must be in place for the training that we need to use to meet our objectives. They also need to consider who in the organization should be involved in reviewing and approving the overall training program. International differences among trainees and whether they will consider it appropriate to ask questions, and whether they expect a trainer to spend some time becoming acquainted with the employees or simply get down to business right away. There are a lot of considerations for planning the training program. Cultural characteristics can affect the training design. For example, economic and educational differences might influence the employee's access to and their ability to use web-based training. Cultural differences may influence whether they will consider it appropriate to ask questions and whether they expect that trainer to spend some time becoming acquainted or just getting started with the training and getting through it. Some cultural dimensions that can have an impact on training that must be considered are going to include individualism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, power distance, and time orientation. When an organization selects an employee for a position in a foreign country, it must prepare that employee for the foreign assignment. This kind of training is called CrossCultural Preparation. It often includes family members who will accompany the employee on their assignment. Methods for providing this training may range from lectures for employees and their families to visits to culturally diverse communities. Employees and their families may also spend time visiting a local family from the country where they will be working. It's important for the employees to remember that returning home is also a challenge when the employees have been away for months or even years. Returning employees often find that life at home seems boring relative to the excitement of learning a new culture, and family members and colleagues at home may find it hard to relate to their recent experiences. Employers should be ready for employees who want to share what they learned and put their recently acquired skills to work in the new assignments. We should also make sure to consider performance management actions across national boundaries. The general principle of performance management may apply in most countries, but the specific methods that work in one country may fail in another. The extent to which managers measure performance may also vary from one country to another. Organizations have to consider the legal requirements, the local business practices, and national cultures when they establish performance management methods in other countries that they're not native to. Differences may include which behaviors are rated, how and the extent to which performance is measured, who is going to be performing the rating, and how feedback will be provided. Compensation decisions about pay structure, incentive pay, and employee benefits become much more complex when an organization has an international workforce. Market pay structures can differ substantially across countries in terms of pay level and the relative worth of jobs. Differences causes dilemmas for global companies. You might ask questions like, should pay levels and differences reflect what workers are used to in their own countries? Or should pay level and differences reflect the earnings of colleagues in the host or the domestic company? Decisions impact company costs and ability to compete. When comparing our wages, companies must consider differences in education, in skills, and in productivity. Cultural and legal differences can also affect our pay structures. Now, when it comes to pay incentive or incentive pay, bonuses and stock options are common kinds of incentives that are awarded differently based on a country's location. When it comes to employee benefits, you must also consider laws of each country that are involved, as well as the expectations of the employees and the values that they put forth in their countries. Paid vacations tend to be much more generous in Western Europe than it is here in the United States. In many countries like Germany and the UK, the norm is to work fewer hours than a US worker over the course of a year. So it's important that we understand these differences and making sure that when it comes to pay structure, we're adjusting accordingly. Qualities associated with success in foreign assignments are the ability to communicate in the foreign country, flexibility, enjoying of a challenging situation that's put forth to an individual, and the support from their family members. As these expatriates assignments near an end, the Human Resource Department faces a final challenge, helping the expatriate make the transition back to their home country. The process of preparing expatriates to return home from those foreign assignments is called repatriation. Culture shock takes place in reverse. The experience has changed that expatriate, and the companies and expatriates' home cultures could have changed as well. Also, because of differences in economies and compensation levels, a returning expatriate may experience a decline in their living standards. While we have new considerations in incorporating our human resource management principles in the global market, it's quite important to remember our human resource management principles are needed regardless of location, so that we continue to do our part to support the organization's objectives and maintaining a high-functioning work culture.